The dust stung Quentin Zane's eyes as he rode across the barren plains of Wyoming Territory. 1878. He'd been alone so long that the sound of his own voice had become foreign to him. But nothing could have prepared him for the sight that awaited him beyond the rocky ridge, a woman with copper-red hair chained to a wagon wheel, her pale skin burned by the merciless sun, her eyes defiant even in desperation. He pulled back on the reins of his buckskin stallion, squinting through the heat haze. After 3 years of wandering the frontier alone, Quentin had learned to mind his own business. Trouble had a way of finding a man out here without him going looking for it. Yet something about the woman's dignified posture, despite her dire circumstances, made him guide his horse closer. "Water," she croaked, her voice cracked from thirst. "Please." Quentin removed his canteen and slid from his saddle. He approached cautiously, boots crunching on the dry earth. Up close, he could see that she was no trail vagrant. Her dress, though dirty and torn, was finely made, and the delicate features of her face spoke of refinement. "What's your name, madam?" he asked, kneeling beside her and bringing the canteen to her parched lips. She drank greedily before answering. "Olivia O'Connor." "What in God's name are you doing out here chained to a wagon wheel?" He examined the heavy iron chains binding her wrists to the spokes of the abandoned wheel, which had been staked firmly into the ground. Her eyes green as spring grass met his. "I refuse to marry Mayor Preston of Ardmore. He doesn't take rejection well." Quentin's jaw tightened. He'd heard of Ardmore, a growing settlement about 20 miles south. He'd planned to ride through there for supplies before continuing on to nowhere in particular. "The mayor did this to you?" he asked, disbelief coloring his voice. She nodded grimly. "He said I could reconsider my answer until sunset, then he'd come back." Her voice faltered. "That was yesterday morning." Quentin glanced at the horizon. The sun was already high in the sky. If she'd been out here for more than a day without water, it was a miracle she was still alive. "Hold still," he said, reaching for the hunting knife at his belt. He examined the chains, finding them secured with a heavy padlock. "I can't break these here. We'll need tools." "Are you going to help me?" Hope flickered in her eyes. "Yes, madam, I am." The words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise her. Quentin hadn't intended to get involved in whatever mess this was, but leaving a woman to die in the elements wasn't something he could reconcile with what little remained of his conscience. He stood, assessing the situation. "I'm going to dig up this stake. Then we'll get you to safety and find a way to remove these chains." "Thank you," she said softly. "But you should know Preston practically owns Ardmore. He has men everywhere. If you help me, you'll be making an enemy." Quentin's weathered face revealed nothing, but inside, a long, dormant fire kindled. "Wouldn't be my first," he said, returning to his saddlebags for tools. Using a small folding shovel from his pack, Quentin began digging around the stake that secured the wagon wheel. The Wyoming sun beat down on his back, sweat soaking through his cotton shirt as he worked. Olivia watched him silently, her eyes never leaving his movements. "How did you end up in Ardmore?" he asked, needing to break the silence more than he cared to admit. Olivia shifted uncomfortably, the chains rattling. "My father died 6 months ago. He was a professor back east. I came west to teach at the school in Ardmore." A bitter smile crossed her face. "I had romantic notions about bringing education to the frontier, and the mayor took a shine to you. Preston sees the school as his pet project. He donated the land and building materials." She sighed. "I believe he thought that entitled him to more." Quentin dug deeper, his jaw tight. "And when you said no, he gave me a choice: marry him or lose my position. When I still refused, he decided more drastic measures were needed to help me see reason." She gestured with her chained hands. "Here we are." The stake began to loosen as Quentin worked it back and forth. "Almost there," he grunted. With a final heave, the metal stake came free, releasing the wheel but leaving Olivia still chained to it. "Can you stand?" he asked, offering his hand. Olivia tried to rise, but her legs gave way beneath her. "I'm sorry," she whispered, frustration evident in her voice. "I haven't had food or water for over a day, and I can't feel my feet." Without hesitation, Quentin scooped her up, wheel and all. The metal rim dragged awkwardly against his side, but he managed to carry her to his horse. "This is going to be uncomfortable," he warned, setting her on the saddle while the wheel dangled at her side. He mounted behind her, one arm securing her waist while the other took the reins. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, her body tense against his. "Not Ardmore," he said grimly. "There's a small homestead about 10 miles north of here. A woman named Hannah lives there alone since her husband died. She's taken in strays before." As they rode, Quentin felt Olivia gradually relax against him, her exhaustion overtaking her wariness. When he looked down, he saw that she'd fallen asleep, her head resting against his chest. Something long forgotten stirred within him, a protective instinct he'd buried after losing everything in Texas years ago. The sun was beginning to set when they approached Hannah Miller's modest homestead, a small cabin with a vegetable garden and a few chickens scratching in the yard. Smoke curled from the chimney, a welcome sight after the long ride. Hannah emerged at the sound of hoofbeats, a shotgun in her weathered hands. At 60, she was as tough as the land she worked, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. "Quentin Zane," she called, lowering her weapon. "Thought you'd left these parts." "I did," he answered, carefully dismounting while supporting the still sleeping Olivia. "Found trouble on my way back through." Hannah's eyes widened at the sight of the chained woman. "Bring her inside," she said without hesitation, hurrying to hold the door open. The warmth of the cabin enveloped them as Quentin carried Olivia to a small bed in the corner. The movement woke her, and she blinked in confusion at the unfamiliar surroundings. "You're safe," he assured her. "This is Hannah Miller. She'll help us." Hannah was already examining the chains with a critical eye. "Preston's work?" she asked sharply. Olivia nodded, surprise crossing her features. "You know him?" "Everyone within 50 miles knows Elias Preston," Hannah spat. "Man's been terrorizing folks since he got himself elected. Uses the law when it suits him, ignores it when it doesn't." She turned to Quentin. "There's a hacksaw in the shed. Won't be pretty, but it'll get those chains off." While Hannah tended to Olivia, bathing her face and hands and providing broth and bread, Quentin retrieved the saw and set to work on the chains. The metal was thick and progress was slow. With each rasp of the blade, his anger toward the man who had done this grew. "Why didn't you just marry him?" he asked abruptly, then immediately regretted the question when he saw the flash of hurt in Olivia's eyes. "Would you marry someone who would chain a person to a wagon wheel and leave them to die?" she asked quietly, Quentin's hands stilled. "No, madam, I wouldn't." "Besides," she continued, her voice stronger now, "I believe in marrying for love, as foolish as that might sound out here." "Not foolish," Hannah interjected, placing a cool cloth on Olivia's forehead. "Just rare." After an hour of work, the chains finally gave way. Olivia rubbed her raw wrists, tears of relief in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Hannah provided clean clothes and privacy for Olivia to wash properly. When she emerged from behind the partition, her copper hair damp and wearing a simple blue dress of Hannah's that was too large for her slender frame, Quentin was struck by how young she looked, perhaps 25 at most, not much younger than his own 30 years. "You can stay here as long as you need," Hannah offered, setting a pot of coffee on the table. Preston's men rarely come this far north. I can't impose, Olivia protested. You've done enough already. Nonsense. It gets lonely out here. Besides, Preston won't stop looking for you, Hannah said matter-of-factly. You need time to recover and plan. Quentin, who had been silent, stood abruptly. I'll leave at first light. Better for you both if I'm not connected to this. He moved toward the door. Where will you go? Olivia asked, her voice stopping him. He shrugged. Nowhere in particular. That's the benefit of having nothing and no one. Stay, Hannah said firmly. At least for a few days. I could use help with some repairs, and if Preston's men come looking, an extra gun wouldn't hurt. Quentin hesitated, his hand on the door. His instinct was to ride out to avoid entanglement in other people's troubles. But when he looked at Olivia's hopeful expression, he found himself nodding. A few days, he agreed. That night, as Quentin lay on a bedroll near the hearth, listening to the sounds of the women's steady breathing from the curtained-off sleeping areas, he wondered what had possessed him to interfere. 3 years of solitude had taught him the value of staying uninvolved. Yet here he was, in the middle of a situation that could only bring trouble. He told himself it was simple human decency he couldn't have left her to die. But as sleep finally claimed him, Quentin knew there was more to it than that. Something about Olivia O'Connor had awakened a part of himself he'd thought long dead. The next morning, Quentin woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Hannah was already up, cooking at the cast-iron stove while Olivia sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug. "Good morning," Olivia said, a small smile on her face. The rest and food had done her good. Color had returned to her cheeks, though dark circles still lingered under her eyes. "Morning," he replied, accepting the coffee Hannah handed him. Over breakfast, they discussed their situation. "Preston won't let this go," Hannah warned. "Man's got pride the size of the territory." "I need to leave Wyoming," Olivia said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Start over somewhere he can't find me." "That takes money," Quentin pointed out, "and you'd be traveling alone." "I managed to come west on my own," she retorted. "I'm not helpless." "No one said you were," Hannah soothed. "But Preston has connections with the railroad and stage lines. He'll have men watching." Quentin considered this. "We need a plan, but first we need information." "I'll ride to Tucker's Crossing tonight's small trading post about 15 miles east. Folks there might know what Preston's doing." "I'll go with you," Olivia stated. Quentin shook his head. "Too dangerous." "It's my life at stake," she insisted. "Besides, I've been cooped up for days at school before. This happened. I need to move." Hannah nodded approvingly. "Girl's got spirit. Let her go, Quentin. Dress differently, no one would recognize her." And so, as dusk fell, Quentin found himself riding toward Tucker's Crossing with Olivia seated behind him, dressed in men's clothes borrowed from Hannah pants, a loose shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat that hid her distinctive hair. Her arms were wrapped around his waist, and he was uncomfortably aware of her closeness. "Thank you," she said as they rode, "for everything." "Don't thank me yet," he replied. "We're not out of this." The trading post was a gathering place for travelers, ranchers, and the occasional prospector. As Quentin and Olivia entered, conversations momentarily halted before resuming. They took a table in the corner, and Quentin ordered whiskey while Olivia asked for coffee. "Keep your hat low and let me do the talking," Quentin murmured. Olivia nodded, hunching her shoulders to appear smaller. It wasn't long before they overheard what they needed. 2 men at a nearby table were discussing recent events in Ardmore. "Mayor's offering $500 for information about the schoolteacher," one said. "Claims she stole from the town treasury before disappearing." "That's so." The other replied skeptically. "Heard different from Bill Jenkins. Says Preston had her chained up somewhere and she escaped." "Well, whatever the truth, There's wanted posters up all over the county. Description mentions red hair hard to miss. Quentin felt Olivia stiffen beside him. He placed a steadying hand on her arm. Seems like a lot of fuss over one woman, the first man continued. Must be more to the story. Their informative conversation was interrupted by the arrival of three hard-looking men, trail dust still clinging to their clothes. Quentin recognized one immediately: Sam Wilcox, Preston's right-hand man and unofficial enforcer. He nudged Olivia, and they both lowered their heads. The newcomers ordered drinks and began questioning the barkeep about strangers in the area. Quentin knew their time was limited. "We need to leave," he whispered to Olivia. "Now." They stood slowly, making their way toward the door when disaster struck. As they passed a rowdy table, a drunk cowboy stumbled backward, knocking into Olivia. Her hat fell, and a cascade of copper hair tumbled down her back. For one frozen moment, no one moved. Then Wilcox's voice cut through the silence. "That's her, the O'Connor woman!" Chaos erupted. Quentin shoved Olivia toward the door, drawing his revolver as Wilcox and his men gave chase. They burst into the night air, running for their horse. "Go, go!" Quentin shouted, helping Olivia mount before swinging up behind her. They galloped into the darkness, the sound of pursuing hoofbeats close behind. Quentin knew the terrain better than their pursuers and guided his horse off the main trail into a narrow ravine. They rode hard for nearly an hour, using every trick he knew to lose their tail, before finally circling back toward Hannah's homestead by a roundabout route. When they finally slowed, Olivia was trembling. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "If I hadn't lost my hat, it was bound to happen," Quentin cut her off. "At least now we know what we're dealing with. Preston's spinning tales about you being a thief to justify the manhunt. What am I going to do?" The despair in her voice tugged at something deep within him. "We'll figure it out," he promised, though he had no idea how to keep that promise. When they returned to Hannah's, the older woman took one look at their faces and wordlessly poured them each a measure of whiskey. They recounted what had happened at the trading post. "You can't stay here now," Hannah said grimly. "They'll be searching every homestead within 50 miles. "I'll leave tonight," Olivia declared. "I won't put you in danger." "And go where?" Quentin demanded. "With no money, no horse, and every lawman in the territory looking for you." "He's right," Hannah agreed. "You need a better plan." Silence fell as they contemplated their limited options. Finally, Quentin spoke, the words surprising even himself. "I'll take you to Colorado," he said. "I know people in Denver who can help get you set up with a new name, new papers." Both women stared at him. "You do that?" Olivia asked. Why, it was a fair question, one he couldn't fully answer even to himself. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply. Hannah nodded slowly. "It could work, but you need to avoid towns and main roads. It's at least a 2-week journey." "We'll leave before dawn," Quentin decided. "Travel by night when we can." That night, as they prepared for the journey, gathering supplies and plotting their route, Quentin found himself alone with Olivia in the barn as they readied the horses. "I never asked why you're out here alone," she said, watching him adjust a saddle. "Everyone has a story." Quentin's hands stilled. It had been years since he'd spoken of his past. "Not much to tell," he said flatly. "I had a small ranch in Texas. Wife died of fever, lost the land to taxes. Been drifting ever since." Olivia's hand touched his arm gently. "I'm sorry." He shrugged off both her touch and her sympathy. "It was a long time ago. How long have you been alone?" 3 years. He resumed his work, hoping she'd drop the subject. "That's a long time to carry grief," she observed quietly. Quentin turned to face her, suddenly irritated. "What about you? What's your story? Why come all the way out here to teach in a place like Ardmore? If his abrupt change of subject bothered her, she didn't show it. After my father died, there wasn't much left for me in Boston. I wanted purpose, adventure perhaps. She smiled ruefully. I certainly found that, though not the kind I imagined. Family, none left. My mother died when I was young, no siblings. Her green eyes held his. Like you, I'm alone in the world. Something passed between them, then a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. Quentin looked away first, uncomfortable with the connection. We should get some sleep, he said gruffly. Long ride ahead tomorrow. As he turned to leave, her voice stopped him. Thank you, Quentin, for seeing me as worth saving. He didn't respond, but her words followed him into dreams that were, for once, not haunted by ghosts from his past. Before first light, they bid farewell to Hannah, who pressed a small pouch of coins into Olivia's hands. My late husband's savings, she explained. Never had cause to use it. I can't accept this, Olivia protested. You can and you will, Hannah insisted. What good is money to an old woman living alone? Use it to start your new life. With tearful thanks, Olivia embraced the older woman. Quentin, uncomfortable with the display of emotion, busied himself with the horses. Take care of her, Hannah told him privately as they prepared to leave. And maybe let her take care of you a bit too. You've been alone too long, Quentin Zane. He had no response to that. They rode south and east, avoiding the main trails, keeping to the shadows of dawn. Quentin had acquired a second horse from Hannah, a steady brown mare for Olivia to ride. They traveled in companionable silence, both alert for signs of pursuit. By midday, they had covered nearly 20 miles. They stopped in a sheltered grove near a stream to rest the horses and eat a cold meal of bread and dried meat. How far to Colorado? Olivia asked, washing trail dust from her face in the cool water. At this pace, about 12 days, Quentin replied. Longer if we need to take detours. She nodded, accepting this without complaint. And your friends in Denver, they can really help me start over. They're not exactly friends, he admitted. More like people who owe me favors, but yes, they can get you papers, maybe even help you find work. What will you do? After you've delivered me safely, the question caught him off guard. He hadn't thought that far ahead. For 3 years he'd lived day to day, never planning beyond the next town or the next odd job. Move on, I suppose, he said finally. Keep drifting. Olivia studied him, her gaze disconcertingly direct. That doesn't sound like much of a life. It's the one I've got, he replied shortly, standing to check the horses. Her question had unsettled him more than he cared to admit. They continued their journey through the afternoon, the landscape gradually changing as they rode, rocky outcroppings giving way to rolling grasslands. By evening, dark clouds had gathered on the horizon, promising rain. We need to find shelter, Quentin said, eyeing the sky. Storm's coming. They pushed on until they found an abandoned line shack, a small, crude cabin likely used by cowboys during cattle drives. It was little more than 4 walls and a roof, with a stone fireplace and a dirt floor, but it would keep them dry. As Quentin tended the horses in the lean-to beside the cabin, the first fat drops of rain began to fall. By the time he entered the cabin, carrying their supplies, the sky had opened up completely. Inside, Olivia had already started a small fire using kindling left by previous occupants. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, creating an almost intimate atmosphere in the confined space. Will we be safe here? She asked, looking up from her task. Safe enough, he answered, setting down their packs. Storm will cover our tracks better than we could ourselves. They ate a simple meal of beans heated over the fire, accompanied by the last of Hannah's bread. The rain drummed steadily on the roof, creating a cocoon of sound that isolated them from the world outside. Tell me about your wife, Olivia said suddenly. Quentin stiffened. Why would you ask about that? Because you never speak of her, yet she's with you all the time. At his questioning look, she explained, I see it in your eyes sometimes the way you look at something that isn't there. He considered deflecting, as he always did when anyone ventured too close to his past. But something about the rain-enclosed cabin and Olivia's gentle presence made him answer. Her name was Sarah, he said, his voice low. We were childhood sweethearts back in Missouri. Married at 18, headed to Texas to build our own place when I was 20. He paused, memories washing over him. She loved wildflowers, used to fill our cabin with them every spring. How did she die? Olivia asked softly. Typhoid. Hit the settlement hard one summer. I was away delivering horses to Fort Worth. His hands clenched involuntarily. By the time I got back, she was already gone, buried with 20 others who didn't make it. I'm so sorry, Olivia whispered. After that, I couldn't bear to stay, sold everything, paid my debts, and started riding. Never stopped. He looked up, meeting her eyes across the fire. Your turn. Why really come west? Plenty of places to teach back east. Olivia was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. My father was a professor of literature at Harvard. After he died, I discovered he'd been supporting me with loans against his future salary. There was nothing left, not even enough to keep our home. She twisted a loose thread on her sleeve. I saw an advertisement for teachers in Wyoming Territory. The pay was good, and they provided housing. And it was as far from Boston as you could get, Quentin added perceptively. She smiled faintly. Perhaps. I thought it would be an adventure, a chance to build something of my own, away from the pity of my father's colleagues and the memory of our reduced circumstances. And instead you found Elias Preston. Her face darkened at the name. Yes. At first he was merely attentive, bringing books for the school, stopping by to check on his investment. I thought he was simply being civic-minded. When did it change? He invited me to dinner at his home about a month after I arrived. I accepted, believing it was a professional courtesy. She swallowed hard. He had a ring. Said he'd known from the moment he saw my application that I was meant to be his wife. Bold, Quentin commented. Presumptuous, she corrected. When I declined as politely as I could, he became insistent. Said I'd come around to the idea that a woman my age, 24, shouldn't be too choosy. The rain intensified, pattering furiously on the roof. Each time I refused, his courtship became more aggressive. Flowers, gifts left at my doorstep. Then came the threats, subtle at first. Complaints about my teaching methods from parents who'd previously been satisfied. Restrictions on school supplies. Her voice hardened. When none of that worked, he had me brought to his office and gave me an ultimatum: marry him or lose my position and be escorted out of town with nothing but the clothes on my back. And you still refused, Quentin said, a note of admiration in his voice. I told him I'd rather starve than be owned, she said simply. That's when his men grabbed me. I thought they were just going to throw me out of town. Instead, she trailed off, the memory of being chained to the wagon wheel still too raw. You're either the bravest or the most stubborn woman I've ever met, Quentin observed. Olivia laughed softly. Probably both. My father always said I had more courage than sense. They fell into comfortable silence, listening to the storm rage outside while the fire crackled between them. Despite the circumstances that had brought them together, Quentin found himself oddly at peace in that moment. We should sleep, he finally said, banking the fire for the night. Still a long way to go tomorrow. There was only one bedroll, which he insisted Olivia take while he made do with his saddle and blanket near the door. As he settled in for the night, he was acutely aware of her presence just a few feet away. Quentin. Her voice came through the darkness. Yes. "Do you think we'll make it to Colorado?" He could hear the worry beneath her question. "Yes," he replied firmly. "I'll get you there safely, I promise." He heard her sigh, a sound of relief. "Good night, then." "Good night, Olivia." Sleep was a long time coming for Quentin that night, his mind filled with copper hair and green eyes, and the strange feeling that his solitary path had irrevocably changed course. The next 5 days established a pattern. They rose before dawn, traveled until the heat of midday, rested, then continued until dusk. They avoided towns and main roads, making camp in secluded locations, caves, abandoned structures, or natural shelters. During these days, a tentative friendship developed between them. Olivia proved herself to be not only resilient but also resourceful, never complaining about the hard travel or sparse conditions. She took her share of the camp duties without being asked, and Quentin found himself appreciating her company in ways he hadn't anticipated. They shared stories of their lives before Quentin spoke of his time as a ranch hand and later as a Texas Ranger, while Olivia told him about growing up surrounded by books and learning in her father's academic world. Despite their different backgrounds, they discovered common ground in their love of literature, though Quentin would never admit how much he enjoyed reading and their observations of the natural world around them. On the 6th day, they encountered their first real trouble. They had just forded a small river and were climbing a rise when Quentin spotted dust on the horizon. Riders, moving fast and heading in their direction. "Into the trees," he commanded, pointing to a dense stand of pines to their right. "Now." They urged their horses into the shelter of the forest, dismounting to lead them deeper into the cover. Through gaps in the foliage, they watched as 6 men rode past on the trail below Preston's men. Quentin was certain, though they were too far away to identify individuals. "They're following our trail," he said grimly. "River crossing slowed them down, but they'll pick it up again." Fear flashed across Olivia's face. "What do we do?" Quentin considered their options. "We change direction, head west for a while, then swing back south. It'll add days to our journey, but it might throw them off. And if it doesn't," his hand moved instinctively to his revolver, "then I'll deal with them." They waited until the riders had passed before mounting again and heading west, keeping to the tree line where possible to mask their trail. The detour took them through increasingly rough country, steep ravines and rocky slopes that were hard on both horses and riders. By nightfall, they were exhausted. They made camp in a small box canyon that offered protection from the wind and concealment from prying eyes. As Olivia prepared their meal, Quentin kept watch, his expression troubled. "You're worried," she observed, handing him a tin plate of beans and salt pork. "They're getting too close," he admitted. "Preston must have men searching every route to Colorado. Is there another way we could go?" "Perhaps north to Montana instead," he shook his head. "Too far and the terrain's worse. Besides, I don't have contacts there who could help you." They ate in silence, each lost in thought. Finally, Quentin spoke. "There's a town about a day's ride from here, Silver Creek. Small place, mostly miners. We might be able to get fresh supplies and information." "Is it safe?" "Safer than continuing with what we have. We're running low on food, and I need to know more about who's looking for us and where." He studied her face in the firelight. "But you'd need to disguise yourself again." Olivia nodded resolutely. "I'll do whatever's necessary." The next morning, she used mud to darken her distinctive hair and bound it tightly beneath a hat. Dressed in the men's clothes Hannah had provided, she looked like a slight young cowhand as long as no one looked too closely. They approached Silver Creek cautiously, arriving as the sun was setting. It was indeed a small settlement, a single dusty street lined with basic establishments: saloon, general store, livery, and a handful of other businesses. Miners and prospectors made up most of the population, with a few families scattered in cabins around the outskirts. "Remember, you're my nephew Jack," Quentin reminded her as they rode into town. "Speak as little as possible." They stopped first at the livery to stable their horses. The liveryman, a barrel-chested man with a gray beard, barely glanced at them as he took their money and pointed them toward empty stalls. "Any place to get a hot meal in town?" Quentin asked casually. "Saloon serves decent stew," the man replied. "Mrs. Wilson takes boarders and feeds 'em too if you're looking for something more respectable for the boy." He nodded toward Olivia. "Much obliged," Quentin said, guiding Olivia back to the street. They opted for Mrs. Wilson's boarding house, a tidy two-story structure at the edge of town. The widow Wilson was a plump, cheerful woman who asked few questions beyond whether they could pay in advance. She showed them to a small room with 2 narrow beds and promised dinner would be ready in an hour. Once alone, Olivia sank onto one of the beds with a sigh of relief. "A real bed," she murmured. "I'd almost forgotten what they feel like." "Don't get too comfortable," Quentin warned. "We leave at first light tomorrow." After washing away the worst of the trail dust, they joined 3 other boarders, a traveling salesman, and 2 miners at Mrs. Wilson's dinner table. The food was simple but abundant: roast beef, potatoes, and fresh baked bread that had Quentin reaching for seconds before he realized it. Conversation flowed around them, mostly local gossip and mining news, until the salesman mentioned something that made both Quentin and Olivia freeze. "Passed through Ardmore last week," he said, buttering a piece of bread. "Town's in an uproar over their missing schoolteacher. Mayor's offering $1,000 now for her return." "1,000?" one of the miners whistled. "What'd she do, steal the town treasury?" "That's what they're saying," the salesman nodded. "Though between us, the bartender at the hotel told me it was personal between her and the mayor. Apparently, she was promised to marry him and ran off instead." "Sounds like a lover's quarrel blown out of proportion," Mrs. Wilson commented, refilling coffee cups. "Maybe, but with that kind of reward, every bounty hunter in the territory will be looking for her." The salesman glanced around the table. "Red-haired woman, early 20s, name of O'Connor. Anyone seen someone like that, they could make themselves a tidy sum." Under the table, Quentin felt Olivia's hand grip his arm, her fingers digging in with barely controlled panic. "Excuse my nephew," Quentin said, rising. "Boy's not feeling well after the long ride. I should get him to bed." Mrs. Wilson looked concerned. "Poor lad does look pale. I'll bring up some chamomile tea." Once back in their room, Olivia began to pace. $1,000, she whispered. "He's insane." "He's desperate," Quentin corrected, watching her move back and forth. "And getting more so, that's not good for us. We need to leave, now." She began gathering their meager belongings. Quentin caught her arm. "Not yet." Rushing out right after that conversation would only draw attention. "We stick to the plan, rest tonight, leave at dawn." A soft knock at the door made them both jump. It was Mrs. Wilson with the promised tea. As she set the tray down, her eyes lingered on Jack for a moment longer than was comfortable. "Your nephew reminds me of my daughter," she said to Quentin. "Something about the eyes." Before either could respond, she added, "Sleep well," and left, closing the door behind her. They stared at each other. "Do you think she knows?" Olivia asked, her voice barely audible. "I don't know," Quentin admitted, "but we're leaving as soon as it's light enough to see the trail." That night, sleep eluded them both. Quentin sat by the window, watching the quiet street below, while Olivia tossed and turned on her narrow bed. The tension between them was palpable, not just from the danger, but from the growing awareness of each other that neither was ready to acknowledge. Dawn was just breaking when they quietly made their way downstairs. intending to slip out without waking the household. To their surprise, Mrs. Wilson was already in the kitchen, packing food into a cloth bundle. "Thought you might be leaving early," she said without looking up. "Take this. It's not much, but it'll keep you going for a day or two." Quentin hesitated, his hand moving instinctively toward his gun. Mrs. Wilson finally turned, her kind eyes meeting Olivia's. "I don't know what trouble you're in, miss, and I don't need to. But a woman knows another woman no matter what clothes she's wearing." "We can't involve you," Quentin said, still wary. "You're not." She handed the food bundle to Olivia. "I never saw you. You never stayed here. That's what I'll tell anyone who comes asking, and they will come, make no mistake." Olivia impulsively hugged the older woman. "Thank you," she whispered. Mrs. Wilson patted her back. "There's a trail behind my property that leads to the old mining road. It'll take you south without going through town." She stepped back, addressing Quentin. "Take care of her, young man. And may God go with you both." They slipped out the back door into the gray light of early morning. True to Mrs. Wilson's word, a narrow trail led away from the house, winding through scrub brush before connecting with a rutted road that headed south. They rode in silence for several miles, the experience at Silver Creek having shaken them both. The knowledge that Preston had escalated the reward for Olivia's capture meant that every stranger was now a potential threat. As the sun climbed higher, Quentin finally spoke. "We need to change our plan. Too many people looking for us now." "What do you suggest?" Olivia asked, her voice strained from the constant tension. "There's an old trapper's cabin I know of in the foothills. We can hole up there for a few days, let things cool down, then make a run for the Colorado border when they're looking elsewhere." It was a risky strategy. Staying in one place increased the chance of discovery, but continuing to travel openly was becoming too dangerous. Olivia nodded her agreement, trusting his judgment. They adjusted their course, heading southeast toward the distant foothills. The landscape became more varied as they rode, transitioning from open grassland to rocky, pine-covered slopes. By mid-afternoon, they had climbed high enough to look back over the vast expanse they had traversed. "It's beautiful," Olivia said, reining in her horse beside Quentin's to admire the view. "In a harsh sort of way." He glanced at her profile, struck by how the golden sunlight illuminated her features. Despite the dirt and exhaustion of their journey, there was a quiet dignity about her that he found increasingly compelling. "We're about 2 hours from the cabin," he said, looking away before she could catch him staring. "Terrain gets rougher from here." The cabin, when they finally reached it as dusk was falling, was little more than a crude shelter, a single room built of logs, with a stone fireplace and a dirt floor. Unlike the line shack they'd stayed in earlier, this had clearly been abandoned for some time. Dust covered every surface, and small animal droppings indicated they weren't the first to seek refuge here. "It's not much," Quentin apologized as they entered, "but it's hidden. No one will find us here unless they know exactly where to look." Olivia surveyed the cabin with a determined expression. "It's perfect. Give me an hour and I'll make it habitable." True to her word, she set about cleaning while Quentin tended to the horses and gathered firewood. By the time he returned with an armload of pine branches, she had swept the floor, cleared the cobwebs, and aired out the single moth-eaten blanket that had been left behind. "Not bad," he said, genuinely impressed. "You'd make a good frontier wife." The words were out before he could stop them, and an awkward silence followed. Olivia busied herself arranging their supplies, her cheeks flushed. "I'll start the fire," Quentin said, grateful for the distraction. That evening, as they sat by the crackling fire sharing the food Mrs. Wilson had provided, a comfortable companionship settled between them. The cabin, though simple, provided a sense of security they had lacked on the trail. "How long should we stay here?" Olivia asked, drawing her knees up to her chest. 3 days, Quentin decided. By then, the search parties will have moved on to other areas. We can make a straight run for the border. She nodded, staring into the flames. And when we reach Denver, what then? It was a question he'd been avoiding. In the days they'd spent together, something had shifted between them, a connection neither had anticipated. The thought of simply delivering her to safety and riding away had become increasingly difficult to contemplate. "That depends on what you want," he said carefully. Olivia looked up, meeting his eyes. "I don't know any more. Teaching was my plan, but after Ardmore." She shook her head. "I'm not sure I could trust another small town. Denver's different. Big city, lots of opportunities for an educated woman. And no place for a drifting cowboy." There was a question in her voice that went beyond the words themselves. Quentin hesitated. For 3 years, he'd avoided putting down roots, convinced that the pain of losing Sarah had been punishment for daring to build a life in the first place. But now, faced with the prospect of walking away from Olivia, he found himself questioning that conviction. "I haven't stayed anywhere for long since Texas," he admitted. "Not sure I remember how." "Perhaps it's time to learn again," she suggested softly. The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken possibilities. Quentin stood abruptly, needing distance from the intensity of the moment. "I'll take first watch," he said. "Get some sleep. I'll wake you in a few hours." Outside, the night air cooled his heated face. He settled on a fallen log with a clear view of the approach to the cabin, his rifle across his knees. The stars overhead were brilliant in the clear mountain air, reminding him of nights on his Texas ranch when he and Sarah would sit on their porch, planning their future. For the first time since her death, those memories brought a bittersweet nostalgia rather than searing pain. He wondered if Sarah, who had always been more generous of spirit than he deserved, would approve of Olivia, of the feelings she stirred in him that he wasn't ready to name. Inside the cabin, Olivia lay awake, listening to the night sounds and thinking about the man keeping watch outside. In the short time she'd known him, Quentin Zane had shown her a kind of quiet strength and integrity that was rare. Despite his gruff exterior, there was a gentleness to him that emerged in unexpected moments: the careful way he tended his horse, how he always made sure she ate first, the respect with which he treated every woman they encountered. She hadn't planned on developing feelings for her rescuer. Indeed, after her experience with Preston, she had been wary of men's attentions. But Quentin wasn't Preston. He had saved her life and asked for nothing in return. He was risking everything to get her to safety, and she was beginning to hope that when they reached Denver, he might consider reasons to stay. The next morning dawned clear and crisp. They spent the day resting and preparing for the final leg of their journey. Quentin checked and cleaned his weapons, while Olivia mended tears in their clothing and reorganized their supplies. "We should reach Denver in about 5 days if we push hard," Quentin said as they shared a lunch of jerky and dried fruit. "Once we cross into Colorado, we'll be able to use the main roads. Preston's influence doesn't extend that far." Olivia nodded, then hesitated. "What happens if we're caught before then?" It was a question they'd both avoided. Quentin's expression darkened. "We won't be." "But if we are," she persisted, "if Preston's men find us?" "Then I'll deal with them," he said firmly. "I won't let them take you back to him, even if it means—" She couldn't finish the thought. "Whatever it takes," he promised, his eyes holding hers. "But it won't come to that. I'll get you to Denver safely." That afternoon, as Olivia napped, exhausted from their journey, Quentin took the opportunity to scout the surrounding area. He needed to ensure their hideout remained secure and to plan the best route for their departure. He had just reached a vantage point that offered a clear view of the valley below when movement caught his eye. Riders, at least 4 of them, following the same trail they had used the day before. Quentin dropped to a crouch, watching intently. The men were moving methodically, clearly tracking something or someone. His heart sank as he realized they must have picked up their trail despite his precautions. He retreated quickly, making his way back to the cabin without using the main path. Olivia was awake when he returned, instantly alert to his expression. "They've found our trail," he said without preamble. "4 riders maybe an hour behind us." Her face paled, but she remained calm. "What do? We leave. Now, take only what we absolutely need." They packed frantically, abandoning anything not essential for survival. Within minutes, they were mounted and moving away from the cabin, taking a steep, barely visible game trail that led higher into the mountains. The path was treacherous, narrow, and littered with loose rock that threatened the horses' footing with every step. They were forced to move slowly, leading the animals for the most difficult sections. All the while, Quentin listened for sounds of pursuit, his body tense with anticipation. By nightfall, they had climbed high enough to look back over the valley. In the gathering dusk, they could see pinpoints of light lanterns moving steadily up the mountainside. "They're still coming," Olivia whispered. "But they don't know exactly where we are," Quentin pointed out. "Those lights mean they're searching, not following." They continued by moonlight, picking their way carefully along the ridge. The night grew cold at this elevation, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Olivia shivered despite the heavy coat she wore. "We can't stop," Quentin said, noting her distress. "Not until we're sure we've lost them." They pushed on through the night, following the ridgeline before beginning a descent toward a different valley than the one they had come from. By dawn, they were both exhausted, the horses nearly spent. "There," Quentin pointed to a cluster of boulders near a small stream. "We'll rest there for a few hours." They hobbled the horses near the water and collapsed in the shelter of the rocks. Olivia was asleep almost instantly, her body curled against Quentin's for warmth. He wrapped an arm around her, his own exhaustion pulling him toward sleep despite his determination to keep watch. He woke with a start, disoriented, uncertain what had disturbed him. The sun was high. They had slept longer than he'd intended. Olivia still slumbered beside him, her face peaceful in repose. Carefully disengaging himself, he stood to check their surroundings. The crack of a rifle shot shattered the silence. The bullet struck rock inches from Quentin's head, sending fragments flying. He dropped to the ground, drawing his revolver as he shouted to Olivia, "Stay down." From his position, he could see 2 riders approaching from the East. Preston's men, no doubt having split up to cover more ground. They were still several hundred yards away, but the high-powered rifle gave them a lethal advantage. Quentin returned fire, his revolver woefully inadequate at this range, but enough to make the riders seek cover. He used the moment to dash to his horse, retrieving his own rifle from its scabbard. Olivia was fully awake now, pressed against the boulders, her eyes wide with fear but her expression resolute. "What can I do?" she asked. "Get the horses ready," he instructed. "We'll need to run as soon as I create an opening." Another shot ricocheted off the rocks as Quentin took aim with his rifle. He fired deliberately, not at the men but at their horses. It was a difficult shot, but the animal reared in pain, throwing its rider. The second man dismounted quickly, taking cover behind a fallen tree. "Now!" Quentin shouted, providing covering fire as Olivia ran to the horses. He followed, mounting quickly and pulling her up behind him on his stallion. They left her mare behind. One horse could move faster, and speed was their only advantage now. They galloped down the slope, weaving between trees as bullets whined past them. The horse, carrying double weight, labored on the uneven ground. Quentin knew they couldn't maintain this pace for long. As they reached the valley floor, he spotted what they needed: a narrow canyon cutting through the hills ahead. It would provide cover and force any pursuers into a vulnerable position. "Hold on tight," he told Olivia, feeling her arms tighten around his waist as he urged the horse toward the canyon entrance. The passage was barely wide enough for a horse and rider, its walls rising steeply on either side. They moved more slowly now, the ground littered with boulders and fallen debris. Behind them, they could hear shouts as their pursuers reached the canyon entrance. Rounding a bend, Quentin spotted a cutback, a narrow side passage that was partly obscured by an outcropping of rock. He guided the horse into this natural hiding place just as another shot echoed through the canyon. They dismounted, leading the exhausted horse deeper into the crevice until they reached a small, enclosed space, not quite a cave, but sheltered on three sides by towering rock walls. "They'll have to come through one at a time," Quentin said, positioning himself at the entrance with his rifle. "That gives us the advantage." Olivia nodded, her face streaked with dust and sweat but her eyes clear and determined. She held Quentin's revolver, ready to defend herself if necessary. Time stretched as they waited, listening to the sounds of their pursuers moving cautiously through the main canyon. Quentin remained motionless, his rifle trained on the narrow approach to their hiding place. Finally, a shadow appeared at the entrance to the cutback. Quentin recognized Sam Wilcox, Preston's enforcer, moving carefully with his rifle raised. Behind him, another man followed at a distance. Quentin took a deep breath, steadying his aim. "That's far enough," he called out. Wilcox froze, then slowly raised his hands. "Just want to talk, Zane," he said, his voice echoing off the rock walls. "Mayor Preston is willing to be reasonable." "Is that why you've been shooting at us?" Quentin responded, not lowering his rifle. "Misunderstanding," Wilcox claimed. "We thought you might be bandits." "Lot of them in these hills." "Try again," Quentin said coldly. Wilcox changed tactics. "Look, the mayor just wants his fiancée back. He's prepared to be generous, forget the whole thing, pay you for your trouble." "I'm not his fiancée," Olivia called out, her voice steady despite her fear. "And I'm not going back." "Madam, you're facing serious charges," Wilcox said. "Theft, breach of contract. The mayor can make that all go away if you return willingly." "Or what?" Quentin demanded. "You'll drag her back in chains again, leave her to die in the desert like before." Wilcox had the grace to look uncomfortable. "That was unfortunate. The mayor was upset. He regrets his actions." "Not enough to call off the bounty," Quentin noted. "Not enough to stop hunting her like an animal. That's why I'm here talking instead of shooting," Wilcox pointed out. One last chance to resolve this peacefully. Quentin considered their options. They were trapped, low on supplies and exhausted. Even if they managed to fight their way out, there would always be more men, more pursuit, as long as Preston's reward remained. "Here's what's going to happen," he said finally. "You're going to take a message back to Preston. Tell him Miss O'Connor is under my protection now. If he wants her, he'll have to come himself, no deputies, no hired guns. Just him and me settling this like men." Wilcox laughed incredulously. "The mayor doesn't fight his own battles." "Then he doesn't get what he wants," Quentin stated flatly. "Because I promise you, Wilcox, the only way you're taking her from here is over my dead body, and I'll make sure to take as many of you with me as I can." The conviction in his voice must have registered because Wilcox's expression sobered. "Where and when?" "3 days from now. Crossing at Bear Creek, just south of the Colorado border. Neutral ground." It was a gamble. If Preston agreed, they'd be exposed and vulnerable. If he didn't, it bought them time to reach safety, Wilcox considered the proposal. "I'll deliver your message. No guarantees the mayor will agree. That's his choice. But this ends one way or another." With a final measuring look, Wilcox backed away, rejoining his companion. They heard the sounds of their retreat echoing through the canyon. Olivia sagged against the rock wall, the revolver trembling in her hand. "Do you think they'll go?" she asked. "For now," Quentin replied, still watching the entrance. "Whether Preston takes the bait is another matter." "You're not really planning to meet him, are you? It would be a trap." Quentin finally lowered his rifle. "Of course it would, but we needed time, and this gives us 3 days to reach the Colorado border." He looked at her directly. "I meant what I said, though. He's not taking you back." The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "Why are you doing this, Quentin? You barely know me." He holstered his weapon, unable to answer immediately. The truth was, he wasn't entirely sure himself. What had begun as a simple act of human decency had evolved into something far more complex, a commitment he hadn't made to anyone since Sarah. "I know enough," he said finally. "I know you're brave and principled. I know you deserve better than what Preston tried to force on you." He paused, then added more softly, "And I know I can't walk away from you now." The admission hung between them, weighted with implications neither was ready to fully address. Olivia stepped closer, her hand reaching up to touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." For a moment, Quentin thought she might kiss him. For a moment, he wanted her to. Instead, she stepped back, practical matters reasserting themselves. "We should move," she said. "They might come back with reinforcements." Quentin nodded, the spell broken. "We'll head east, then loop back south. With any luck, we can cross into Colorado by tomorrow night." They led the horse out of their hiding place, checking carefully for signs of lingering pursuers before mounting. The animal was still tired but had recovered enough to carry them both at a steady pace. As they rode, Quentin considered their confrontation with Wilcox. It had been a calculated risk, challenging Preston directly. The mayor was unlikely to accept such terms. Men like him preferred to let others do their dirty work. But the message would rattle him, perhaps enough to make him careless. They traveled through the afternoon and into the evening, pushing on despite their exhaustion. The landscape gradually changed, becoming less mountainous, as they descended toward the plains that straddled the Wyoming-Colorado border. They made camp that night in a dense thicket near a small creek, not daring to light a fire. They ate cold rations and shared the last of their water, planning to refill their canteens at dawn. "One more day," Quentin said as they huddled together beneath his coat for warmth. "Once we're across the border, we'll find a town, get fresh horses and supplies. Then it's just 3 days to Denver." Olivia nodded, her head resting against his shoulder. "And Preston, if he's smart, he'll cut his losses once we're in Colorado. His influence doesn't extend that far. And if he's not smart," Quentin's arm tightened around her, "then I'll handle it." She was quiet for a long moment. "I never meant to bring this trouble into your life," she said finally. "I'm beginning to think it was exactly what my life needed," he replied, surprising himself with the honesty of the admission. Olivia lifted her head to look at him, searching his face in the dim moonlight. "What do you mean?" Quentin struggled to find the right words. "For 3 years I've been running from my past, from anything that might matter, drifting, existing but not really living." He met her gaze. "Then I found you chained to that wagon wheel, and suddenly I had a purpose again. Someone worth fighting for." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "And after Denver, will you keep drifting?" It was the question he'd been asking himself with increasing frequency. The thought of returning to his solitary existence after these days with Olivia seemed hollow, empty in a way it hadn't before. "I don't know," he said honestly. What about you? What will you do once you're safe? Find work, I suppose. Start over. She hesitated. I've been thinking about what Mrs. Wilson said about how there will always be people looking for me as long as Preston's reward stands. You could change your name, Quentin suggested. Start fresh where no one knows you. Perhaps. She looked away, then back at him with sudden resolution. Or perhaps there's another solution. In Denver we could. She trailed off, color rising in her cheeks. Could what? He prompted. We could marry, she said in a rush. A married woman takes her husband's name. No one would look for Olivia O'Connor if she were Olivia Zane. The proposal, practical as it was framed, left Quentin momentarily speechless. Marriage was the furthest thing from what he'd imagined for his future, a commitment he'd believed himself incapable of making again after Sarah's death. Yet as he looked at Olivia's face, open and vulnerable in the moonlight, he found the idea didn't frighten him as it should have. Instead, it stirred something long dormant within him, hope, perhaps, or the recognition that some wounds could finally heal. You don't have to answer now, she said quickly, misreading his silence. It was just a thought, a practical solution. We hardly know each other, and I wouldn't expect— Yes, he interrupted softly. Olivia stopped mid-sentence, her eyes widening. Yes. If that's what you want, if it would help keep you safe, then yes, I'll marry you in Denver. He paused, then added with careful honesty, but you should know, I'm beginning to think I'd want to anyway, practical reasons aside. Her smile then was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, radiant, transformative. Without words, she leaned forward and kissed him, a gentle touch of lips that nonetheless sent warmth cascading through his body. When she pulled back, Quentin found himself speechless once more, but for entirely different reasons. The comfortable silence that followed was filled with unspoken promises and possibilities neither had dared consider before. They slept that night in each other's arms, the uncertainty of their situation temporarily overshadowed by the certainty they had found in each other. Dawn brought renewed determination. They broke camp quickly and continued their journey south, following the contours of the land to remain as concealed as possible. By midday, they had reached a point where Quentin was confident they were within a few hours' ride of the Colorado border. We're going to make it, Olivia said, hope evident in her voice for the first time in days. We're not safe yet, Quentin cautioned, scanning the horizon out of habit. We still need to— He stopped abruptly, spotting movement in the distance. Riders, at least 6 of them, spread out in a line that blocked their path south. They've cut us off, he said grimly, reining in their horse. Preston must have guessed we'd head straight for the border. Olivia's arms tightened around his waist. What do we do now? Quentin assessed their options, which were rapidly dwindling. To the west, the terrain grew more mountainous, difficult to traverse, but offering places to hide. To the east, the land opened into rolling plains that provided little cover but faster travel. East, he decided. We'll make a run for it, try to circle around them and cross the border further east. They veered sharply, the horse responding to Quentin's urging despite its fatigue. Behind them, they heard shouts as they were spotted, followed by the distant thunder of pursuing hoofbeats. Their horse, already taxed beyond its limits, gave everything it had, galloping across the open grassland with desperate speed. But carrying 2 riders, it couldn't maintain the pace needed to outrun fresh mounts. The pursuers gained ground steadily, the gap narrowing from hundreds of yards to dozens. A rifle shot cracked the air, the bullet passing harmlessly overhead, a warning, not a genuine attempt to hit them. They want us alive, Quentin shouted over the wind. That gives us an advantage. Ahead, he spotted what might be their salvation, a shallow ravine cutting across the plain, its banks lined with brush and small trees. If they could reach it, they might find enough cover to make a stand. Their horse practically stumbled down the bank, its sides heaving with exertion as Quentin drew it to a halt in the shelter of the ravine. They dismounted quickly, Quentin retrieving his rifle as Olivia took the reins of the exhausted animal. "Stay down," he instructed, positioning himself where he could observe the approach of their pursuers without being immediately visible. "If things go badly, take the horse and keep going east. Don't stop until you reach Colorado." "I'm not leaving you," she protested. "Olivia." He turned to face her, his expression intense. "Promise me, if it comes to it, you'll save yourself." She met his gaze steadily. "Only if you promise to do everything in your power to come back to me." "I promise," he said solemnly. The sound of approaching riders drew his attention back to the plain above. He counted 6 men, spread out as they approached the ravine. Preston's men, led by Sam Wilcox. They halted just beyond rifle range, apparently discussing their approach. Quentin took the opportunity to check his ammunition. He had 12 rounds for the rifle, another 6 in his revolver. Not enough for a prolonged fight, but perhaps enough to convince them the price was too high. Finally, Wilcox rode forward alone, stopping at the edge of the ravine. "Zane," he called, "you're surrounded. Come out peaceful-like, and no one needs to get hurt." "That wasn't our arrangement, Wilcox," Quentin shouted back. "I said Preston himself or no deal." "Mayor couldn't make it," Wilcox replied with mock regret. "Sent me with a message instead. Says the offer still stands. Bring Miss O'Connor back. All charges dropped and $500 for your trouble. And if I decline, then we take her anyway and you don't walk away." Quentin's finger tightened on the trigger. "You're welcome to try." Wilcox sighed audibly. "Don't be a fool, Zane. She ain't worth dying for." "That's where you're wrong," Quentin replied calmly. "Now, unless Preston's paying you enough to die for him, I suggest you and your men ride away, because the first one who comes down that bank isn't riding back." There was a pause as Wilcox considered his options. Quentin knew the man was a hired gun, not a true believer in Preston's cause. His loyalty extended only as far as his payment. "Last chance," Wilcox called. "We've got you outnumbered and outgunned." "Maybe," Quentin acknowledged. "But you'll still be the first to die. Is that what Preston's paying you for?" Another silence, longer this time. Then Wilcox turned his horse, riding back to confer with his men. The discussion appeared heated, with gestures toward the ravine and animated disagreement. Finally, Wilcox rode forward again. "We're leaving," he announced, "but this isn't over. Preston wants the woman, and he'll get her one way or another." "Tell Preston if he comes after her again, I'll bring the fight to him," Quentin warned. "Directly to his doorstep in Ardmore." Wilcox's expression suggested he didn't doubt the threat. With a final nod that might have held a hint of reluctant respect, he turned and led his men away, riding west rather than returning north. Quentin watched until they were distant specks on the horizon before lowering his rifle. Only then did he realize how tightly wound his body had been, tension releasing in a long exhale. Olivia emerged from where she had been sheltering with the horse, her face pale but composed. "Are they really gone?" "For now," Quentin confirmed. "But Wilcox was right, it's not over. Preston won't give up easily." "Then we keep going," she said resolutely. "To Denver, as we planned." They rested briefly, allowing their horse to recover some strength before mounting again. Rather than risk being spotted if Wilcox and his men circled back, they continued east through the ravine, following its winding course until it opened onto the plains once more. By sunset, they had crossed an invisible line that marked the border between Wyoming Territory and Colorado. There was no physical boundary, no sign to indicate the transition, but Quentin knew from his travels that they had left Preston's domain behind. "We made it," he told Olivia as they paused on a small rise, looking back the way they had come. "We're in Colorado now." She leaned against him, fatigue evident in every line of her body but relief brightening her eyes. "What's the nearest town?" "Millerville," Quentin replied. "Small place, but they'll have what we need. Should reach it by midday tomorrow." They made camp one final time, more relaxed now that the immediate danger had passed. For the first time in days, Quentin allowed himself to build a small fire, its warmth and light a comfort in the growing chill of the evening. As they sat side by side, watching the flames, Olivia broached the subject that had been temporarily set aside during their flight. "Did you mean it?" she asked softly. "About marrying me in Denver?" Quentin met her questioning gaze. "I did." He took her hand in his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "But I want to be clear, this isn't just about keeping you safe from Preston. These past days, getting to know you." He struggled, unaccustomed to expressing such feelings. "You've reminded me there's more to life than just surviving." Olivia's smile was tender. "For me too. When I was chained to that wagon wheel, I thought my life was over. Instead, it was just beginning." She leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his. "I think perhaps we found each other when we needed it most." Their kiss this time was deeper, a promise of the future they both now dared to imagine. When they finally parted, Quentin felt a peace he hadn't known in years. "We should rest," he said, though rest was the furthest thing from his mind at that moment. Still a long ride to Denver. They reached Millerville the next day as Quentin had predicted. It was indeed a small settlement, a few dozen buildings clustered around a main street, with a general store, livery, hotel, and the other essentials of frontier life. Their appearance drew curious glances, but no undue attention as they made their way to the livery. There, they traded their exhausted mount for 2 fresh horses, adding enough to the exchange from Hannah's money pouch to satisfy the liveryman. At the general store, they purchased supplies for the remainder of their journey: food, ammunition, and a new dress for Olivia, who was still wearing Hannah's borrowed men's clothing. 3 days to Denver," Quentin said as they prepared to depart, having spent only a few hours in Millerville. "We'll take it easier now. No need to push so hard." The remainder of their journey passed without incident. They traveled by day on the main roads, no longer needing to hide, and stayed at roadhouses or camped comfortably each night. With the immediate danger behind them, they had time to talk, to learn more about each other, to build the foundation for what they both now acknowledged would be a shared future. Denver appeared on the horizon late on the 3rd day, a sprawling city by frontier standards, with buildings of brick and stone, streets laid out in orderly grids, and the constant movement of people, horses, and wagons that marked a thriving community. "It's larger than I expected," Olivia remarked as they rode down the main thoroughfare. "And growing every day," Quentin replied. "Gold and silver, the railroad, Denver's becoming the heart of the West." He guided them to a modest hotel in a respectable but not fashionable district. After securing rooms separate, in deference to propriety, they enjoyed their first proper meal in weeks at the hotel's dining room. "What happens now?" Olivia asked over coffee. "Tomorrow I'll contact my associate," Quentin said, "man named Thornton. He can arrange new papers for you and perhaps point us toward employment opportunities." "Us?" Her eyes lit with hope. Quentin nodded. "If we're to be married, I'll need steady work. Can't support a wife by drifting." The smile that bloomed on her face was worth every hardship they had endured to reach this point. The following week was a whirlwind of activity. Thornton, a former lawman turned private investigator, proved as helpful as Quentin had hoped. For a reasonable fee, He provided Olivia with a new identity papers documenting her as Olivia Matthews, recently arrived from Chicago, and directed Quentin to an acquaintance who managed a large cattle operation outside the city. "They need experienced hands," Thornton explained. "And a man with your background could move up quickly to foreman." The opportunity was better than Quentin had dared hope for. The ranch owner, impressed by his knowledge and experience, offered him not only employment but also the use of a small cabin on the property perfect for a man with a new wife. And so, 10 days after arriving in Denver, Quentin Zane and Olivia O'Connor stood before a justice of the peace in a simple ceremony witnessed by Thornton and his wife. Olivia wore a new blue dress that matched her eyes, while Quentin had invested in a proper suit for the occasion, his first in years. "I, Quentin, take you, Olivia, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he vowed, his voice steady despite the emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part." As Olivia repeated the same vows, her eyes shining with happiness, Quentin marveled at how dramatically his life had changed in just a few short weeks. From a lonely drifter to a husband with a home and a purpose, all because he'd happened upon a woman chained to a wagon wheel in the Wyoming wilderness. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the justice declared. "You may kiss your bride." Their kiss sealed more than just their marriage vows. It was a promise to each other, a new beginning, a redemption neither had sought but both had found. Later that night, in the privacy of the hotel room they now shared as husband and wife, Olivia rested her head on Quentin's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "You think Preston will ever find us?" she asked, the question that had lingered despite their newfound security. Quentin stroked her copper hair, spread across the pillow like flames. "He might try. Men like him don't forget easily. And if he does, then we'll face him together," Quentin said simply. "But I think even Preston has limits to his reach and his patience. In time, he'll find another woman to fixate on, and Olivia O'Connor will be forgotten." "Because she no longer exists," Olivia murmured with satisfaction. "Now there's only Olivia Zane." "Mrs. Zane," Quentin agreed, the name still new and wonderful on his tongue. "My wife." The word held a world of meaning: commitment, protection, partnership, and most surprisingly, love. For Quentin, who had believed himself incapable of loving again after Sarah's death, the depth of his feelings for Olivia was both terrifying and exhilarating. "I never thought I'd marry again," he confessed in the darkness. "After Sarah, I convinced myself I didn't deserve another chance, that loving someone would only lead to more pain." Olivia propped herself up to look at him, her expression serious in the dim light. "And now I know that's not true," he said, pulling her close again. "Whatever happens, whether Preston finds us or not, whether life brings ease or hardship, I'm grateful for every day I have with you." 2 years passed. Quentin had indeed risen quickly at the cattle operation, his natural leadership and hard work earning him the position of foreman within 18 months. Olivia, meanwhile, had found fulfillment teaching at a small school on the outskirts of Denver, her past safely buried beneath her new identity. They had made a comfortable home in the cabin on the ranch property, which they had expanded with Quentin's carpentry skills, to include a proper kitchen and a small second bedroom, a room that now housed their 6-month-old son, Thomas, named for Olivia's father. Life had settled into a rhythm neither had dared hope for when they'd first met. They had friends, community, and most importantly, each other. The shadows of their past, Preston's threats, Quentin's grief had receded, though never entirely disappeared. And then, on a crisp autumn day, the past returned with a vengeance. Quentin was in the corral, training a new horse when one of the ranch hands rode in at a gallop. "Rider coming," the young man reported. "Says he's looking for Quentin Zane. Wouldn't give his name." Instinctively, Quentin's hand moved to his hip, where he still carried his revolver despite the relative peace of their new life. "What does he look like?" "Older gent, fancy clothes. Got a scar across his right cheek." A description Quentin didn't recognize, which was both a relief and a concern. "Tell Olivia to stay in the house with Thomas," he instructed, "and have the men stand ready, just in case." He watched the approach of the lone rider from the corral fence, his body tense with readiness. The stranger was indeed well-dressed, his horse a fine specimen that spoke of wealth. As he drew closer, Quentin could see gray hair beneath a black hat and the distinctive scar the ranch hand had mentioned. "Mr. Zane," the man called, halting his horse at a respectful distance. "Who's asking?" Quentin replied cautiously. "My name is Edward Blackburn," the stranger said, dismounting with the stiffness of age. "I've come from Ardmore, Wyoming, on a matter of some importance." At the mention of Ardmore, Quentin's hand tightened on his gun. "What business could you have with me from Ardmore?" Blackburn approached slowly, hands visible to show he was unarmed. "I'm the new mayor," he explained. "Elias Preston is dead." The news hit Quentin like a physical blow. "Dead how?" "Heart failure 3 weeks ago." Blackburn's expression was grim. "Before he died, he made certain confessions about a schoolteacher named O'Connor." Quentin's face revealed nothing, years of practice serving him well. "I don't know anyone by that name." Blackburn smiled faintly. "I believe you do, Mr. Zane. Your wife, perhaps, the former Miss Olivia O'Connor. What do you want?" Quentin demanded, abandoning the pretense. "If you've come to cause trouble, quite the contrary," Blackburn interrupted. "I've come to make amends on behalf of the town of Ardmore." He reached into his coat, slowly to avoid alarming Quentin, and withdrew an envelope. "This contains 2 things. First, an official document clearing Olivia O'Connor of all charges and allegations made by Elias Preston. Second, a bank draft for $1,000 compensation for the damages she suffered." Quentin made no move to take the envelope. "Why would you do this?" "Because what was done to her was wrong," Blackburn said simply. Preston's deathbed confession revealed the full extent of his obsession. Many in Ardmore suspected the truth, but few dared stand against him while he lived. He extended the envelope again. "This won't undo the harm, but it might help your family build a future without looking over your shoulders." Cautiously, Quentin accepted the envelope, opening it to verify the contents. The document appeared official, bearing the seal of Ardmore and multiple signatures. The bank draft was drawn on a reputable Denver bank. "How did you find us?" he asked, still suspicious. "Preston had men searching for nearly a year," Blackburn admitted. "They lost your trail in Denver, but rumors of a red-haired woman married to a former Texas Ranger eventually reached Ardmore. It wasn't difficult to connect the pieces." Quentin tensed again. "And now others know where we are." Blackburn shook his head. "Only me. The men Preston employed have been dismissed. The bounty has been withdrawn. Your wife's name has been cleared." He smiled slightly. "You're free, Mr. Zane. Both of you." From the doorway of their cabin, Olivia appeared, holding Thomas in her arms. She had clearly overheard enough to understand the situation. "Is it really over?" she called, her voice carrying across the yard. Blackburn turned, bowing slightly in her direction. "Yes, Mrs. Zane. It's over. Ardmore owes you a debt that can never truly be repaid, but we've tried to make what amends we can." Quentin moved to join his wife, standing protectively at her side as Blackburn approached. The older man's eyes softened at the sight of the child. "Your son?" he asked. "Yes," Olivia confirmed. "Thomas Quentin Zane, A fine name. Blackburn nodded approvingly. I hope he grows up in a world better than the one his parents had to navigate. We're doing our best to ensure that, Quentin said, his arm around Olivia's waist. After declining their hesitant offer of hospitality, Blackburn prepared to depart. I won't intrude on your lives further, he assured them. As far as Ardmore is concerned, Olivia O'Connor's story ends with her disappearance. What became of her afterward is no one's business but yours. They watched him ride away, standing together in the yard until his figure disappeared over the distant ridge. Is it strange, Olivia mused, to feel both relieved and disappointed? Part of me had almost hoped for a reckoning with Preston. Better this way, Quentin assured her, taking Thomas from her arms to bounce the gurgling infant. Clean ending, no more blood. She leaned against him, her copper hair now streaked with a few strands of silver despite her youth catching the afternoon sunlight. What shall we do with the money? Quentin considered the question. Could put it aside for Thomas's education. Or, she prompted when he hesitated, or we could buy that piece of land I've been looking at, he suggested. The one along the river with the good pasture, build our own place like I had in Texas. Olivia's face lit with enthusiasm. Our own ranch, you'd want that? I would. The realization had been growing in him for months, the desire to build something permanent again, to create a legacy for their son. If you would. Yes, she said without hesitation. Yes, I would love that. That night, after Thomas was asleep in his cradle, they sat on the porch of their cabin watching the stars emerge in the clear Colorado sky. The envelope from Blackburn lay open on the small table between them, its contents representing the final resolution of the ordeal that had brought them together. It's strange to think, Olivia reflected, that if Preston hadn't been so obsessed, if he hadn't had me chained to that wagon wheel. We never would have met, Quentin finished for her. I know, I've thought the same thing. Does that make you grateful to him in some perverse way? She asked curiously. Quentin considered the question seriously. Not grateful, no, what he did was unforgivable. He reached for her hand, his thumb brushing over the gold band on her finger. But I am grateful for every moment since I found you, even the dangerous ones. They led us here. Olivia squeezed his hand, her eyes bright with emotion. From a wagon wheel in the wilderness to our own ranch and a family. It's more than I ever dared hope for when I came west. It's just the beginning, Quentin promised. Thomas will have siblings, the ranch will grow, and we'll grow old together watching it all unfold. Is that a prediction, Mr. Zane? She teased. No, Mrs. Zane, he replied, pulling her into his arms. It's a promise. And it was a promise they would keep. Over the years that followed, the Zane Ranch became one of the most prosperous in the region. Thomas was joined by 2 sisters and another brother. Olivia continued teaching until she established a proper school on their property for their children and those of neighboring ranchers. Quentin, once so solitary and burdened by his past, found himself surrounded by family and community, his days filled with purpose and his nights with peace. The loneliness that had defined him for so long became a distant memory, replaced by the rich tapestry of a life shared with the woman he had rescued, and who, in her own way, had rescued him in return. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, and they sat together on the porch of the home they had built, they would remember how their journey began with a lonely cowboy finding a woman chained to a wagon wheel, her crime nothing more than refusing to marry the wrong man. Do you ever wonder, Quentin asked once, what would have happened if I'd ridden past that day, if I'd minded my own business? Olivia shook her head, copper and silver strands catching the lamplight. No, she said simply, because you wouldn't have. The man I love could never have ridden past someone in need. It's not in your nature. And she was right. For all his attempts to remain uninvolved, to protect himself from further pain, Quentin Zane had never truly been the drifter he pretended to be. He had always been a man waiting to find his way home. In Olivia, in their children, in the life they had built together from the ashes of tragedy and injustice, he had found that home at last.